Well, the thing that my mom said was the diagnosis basically is a qualification for an amazing experience on the planet. And the price of admission is basically that school is going to be hard. And that was what was true, is that school was hard, but the measure of success was not based on education in my family. It was based on what you think of where you've been, which is actually a line on my dad's song that I just realized. But it's about thinking about your experience and what you bring and express in reaction to that experience. And that was the measure of success in my family, not sort of what you've learned in school and how you're able to relay that information, but rather what you learned in life and how you were able to express it artistically. And that was the measure of success that we, the playing field that we were in. And so it was really, school was a secondary consideration. And she looked at me and she said, "Congratulations and welcome to the family," because everybody in my family was dyslexic, and I went from feeling completely isolated to feeling completely embraced and held and connected. And that was really the beginning of my life in the arts, because I was qualified with this dyslexic brain for a life in the arts as far as my parents were concerned. And so I didn't have at all negative experience involved in, or incorporated into my dyslexic diagnosis, but rather an incredibly exciting and I guess anticipatory experience with an alternative mind through which to experience the world. So it was really a great story of connectivity and excitement.
That's up for a lot of debate. So it's
a different ability.
Well, it's officially considered a learning disability, but I think those in the field would prefer to call it a learning difference. Sure. So I set up a nonprofit that actually creates curricula for middle school students that accentuates the cognitive advantages that dyslexia provides. We now know on a neuroscientific level that the brain construction of the dyslexic mind actually carries with it significant reasoning and cognitive capacities that the general population doesn't get to enjoy. So I thought that rather than forcing students like me and Sally and our son through a system where the only focus is on our cognitive deficiencies, that it makes a lot of sense for us to introduce midstream, specifically middle school, exposure to those advantages so that the individual whose self-esteem has been deteriorated and eroded as a result of being singled out for reading remediation can then be given an opportunity to reverse that narrative and create a positive spin based on seeing evidence of what they can do that others can't. My father was a diagnosed dyslexic, and my mother was a child developmental psychologist. So I grew up in a supportive home as well. However, that didn't spare me from the hazing and the bullying that accompanied dyslexia, and that's often an experience that those who have this struggle experience. And I think that it's actually that process of isolation and ostracization that lends itself to some of the negative outcomes for dyslexics. We have a 35% attrition rate in the dyslexic population. We represent 50% of all adolescents involved in drug and alcohol abuse. Other statistics show that 60% of all incarcerated youth have dyslexia. So these are pretty staggering outcomes that I think are directly correlated to this notion of buying into this fictitious narrative that we're deficient. Yes, we've got a reading issue, absolutely. But with the advent of technology, with the advent of the neuropsychological discoveries that are being made, we can now target and direct the teaching to these individuals so that we can lend to the positive outcomes, which is 35% of all entrepreneurs have dyslexia, or 40% of all self-made millionaires. So you look at these disparate outcomes, and my belief is that the delta, the divergence happens based on the malignant self-esteem. And so if we can target that, we can start directing individuals to those positive outcomes.
I think so, definitely.
Undoubtedly.
Yeah.
I made a silly decision to buy a restaurant when I was 23 years old to teach myself business, and as we all know, the restaurant business has a disproportionate failure rate, and I look back, luckily I was able to successfully exit that venture, and I look back and I attribute that success unilaterally to my dyslexia. The fact that I was able to anticipate the needs of customers prior to them even knowing they had it, or being able to find solutions to problems which are unfortunately abundant in the restaurant business, and being able to make very quick, very innovative decisions on problems that others would have just viewed as a block, as a brick wall that they couldn't surmount. So without a doubt, my dyslexia has been a huge professional advantage, and in this day and age, technology has enabled us to just sort of make up for some of the deficiencies associated with dyslexia, spelling or grammatical errors. You know, there was once a time when they said, is spell check going to create some sort of indolence in the student population? And now the common response is, how could you have a spelling mistake? Didn't you do spell check? So technology is very much going to be a remedy, certainly has been and will continue to be, on augmenting some of the deficiencies. I think we're going to be looking at a mitigation of the negative and enhancement of the positive.
And if I can just say, the thing that I recognized in school was that kids were walking through the institution of education that to me was, a brick wall. And they just seemed to be so effortlessly walking through this, what to me was a brick wall. And I think a lot of kids might get to the brick wall and say, forget it, I'm out of here. But with a little bit of compassion from teachers and a little bit of support from families, I was able to find the edge of, scale myself to the edge of that brick wall and skirt around it. And the benefit of having done that is that I realized when I come upon a brick wall in any avenue of my life, that I know that there's an edge. And so that's really an incredible strength that I gained early on from my struggles with my scholastic experience.